The African rain will fall and wash away all my tears. African falling rain, African falling rain, will you bless my life? Oh, will you bless my life? Oh, will you bless my life? Oh, will you bless my life?
Sunday morning at the Glen Jewish Bowling Club near Cape Town. Not far from the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost tip of the African continent, the point where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans mingle their waters. This is the southernmost border of the last white foothold on the dark continent. Will the blacks nevertheless succeed in pushing the whites even from here?
Okay, good, good.
Do the gathering clouds really signal the end of the good days for the Jewish community in South Africa?
You got the license there, too.
Say it there again, Judy.
Yes,
There are 120,000 Jews in South Africa, a small minority within a white minority of 4 million, facing a majority of 24 million blacks. Sunday morning, in a small village in one of the black South African homelands, Bophuthatswana. Most of the men have left the village already, looking for work in the large white cities. Bophuthatswana is not a geographic entity. It represents a form of black autonomy scattered through no less than 7 divided enclaves. South Africa's white government believed that such autonomy would separate black problems from white, and so permit the two races to live side by side, but separately. This belief forms the basis of the apartheid policy, which has held its own for many a long year. Sun City in Bophuthatswana is a place for vacationing and gambling. It is situated only a few miles from the village we just visited. Sun City is one of the largest fun centers in the entire world.
As the smoke goes on, waggling their wings, trying to keep their direction beautifully line abreast as they go over the top. As I said, as you go over there, the pilot hanging straight down in these straps, doing about 100 knots and then diving down the speed, climbing very quickly to about 180, almost 200 knots as they go out and bottom out from the loop.
Only a few years ago, this place was a wilderness. Recently, it began to blossom. Everything here is artificial. The lakes, the waterfalls, even the streams.
Writing stops on what they actually make them on the birds and office stuff.
That special music, that Chupacabra man is an African. He plays a special music, and we'll move it along African music.
Gambling in South Africa is illegal. In the homelands, it is permitted. And that is the main secret of Sun City's success. Sun City was founded by a Jewish fellow born to an emigre family from Lithuania. He started his career by running a small, strictly kosher hotel. Today, he's the boss of a vast network of vacation and gambling centers, most of them in the Bantustan homelands. Sol Kersner.
Apartheid cannot be defended. It's indefensible. The fact that practically it's not possible to change overnight is something that the Western world doesn't always want to admit, and particularly the media are not keen to admit this. But practically speaking, there is a problem in changing overnight. But if you ask me, is apartheid a fair system? Of course it isn't a fair system. Should apartheid be abolished? Absolutely. But it must somehow be done in a manner that will not lead to chaos. And we have seen in Africa chaos. We have seen certain countries being given independence, but basically the people of those countries are no more independent, and in fact less independent and less free than they were when they were colonies.
Johannesburg is South Africa's largest city. It stands on a vast plateau some 2 kilometers above sea level. This year, Johannesburg is celebrating the centenary of its foundation, 100 years of gold mining in this valley. We film these scenes from the Panorama Heights in Johannesburg. The city is surrounded by slag heaps, spewed up from underground and discarded as waste once the gold was sifted out. The owner of the place is Solly Sachs, also from an immigrant Jewish family from Lithuania.
Johannesburg is built on a gold mine. The whole of Johannesburg is built on the gold mine. It's called the City of Gold for that very reason. And I think the buildings and the view that you see from out here is all due to the gold. Much of South Africa has survived on the gold price going up and up and up all the time, and it brings in a tremendous source of revenue for the country.
1,312 meters below the surface of the Earth. The mine in which we're filming is called Lebanon. 8,000 black miners drive their drills into the seams of gold. In this tunnel where we are filming, 130 blacks are hard at work. It is very hot and extremely humid. They work 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. 8,000 blacks drill and drag out the ore. 1,000 whites supervise the labor. Once a year, they are entitled to a 3-week vacation. If they opt for less time off, they are rewarded by a special bonus. The starting wage is $100 a month, but this was fixed only after a recent miners' strike, which raised the basic wage by 40%. The mine management fear that due to the current unrest in the country, the black workers may seek a further wage hike, thus bringing the cost of mining the gold to something like its real worth. The black laborers come from the homelands, as well as from other adjoining nations. There is a vast waiting list for employment, which for many is their only hope of saving their families from starvation. The management of the mine provides for all their needs, including food and accommodation. This means that almost the entire salary can be saved and sent home. Each ton of slag yields only 5 grams of pure gold. Once a day, the gold is smelted down. The result of the labors of 8,000 black miners is one single gold brick, which weighs 25 kilograms and is worth $250,000.
Lovely house with 5 bedrooms. We have servants who keep it up. It's easier for the woman of the home because you have that extra help and you have the extra necessities, what you like. I think the life here is also, from the living style point of view, is slightly easier.
Johannesburg is surrounded by black townships. Each day they flood into the city by their thousands. A few live within the city limits by virtue of a special pass. They live in attics or cellars or in the servants' quarters of the white homes.
I am a bondsman, a poor man. I am a ghetto man, I am a thief. Who saw the gutter man, who has no compassion, who heard the widow who cannot weep. In the black streets, in the poor towns, I hear a thunder which cannot roll. Mine are the eyes that steal from the orphanage, a groveler groping in the grime. Inside is a Congo jungle beast, lion, leopard man, a tiger man from Timbuktu. Even a lover man strutting down the avenue, a winding river searching for the sea.
Until recently, no black was allowed to stay within the city limits overnight without the special pass. Now, under mounting pressure, the authorities have begun to reassure the blacks that they will not be forcibly returned to their townships. South Africa has been ruled by the National Party since 1948. The minority Progressive Party does its best to fight apartheid from the opposition benches in the White Parliament building in Cape Town. At the head of the opposition ranks is a Jewish woman, Helen Suzman.
There is a very definite feeling among black people, radical young blacks particularly, that their patience has worn out and that they want change, radical change, now and not in the long distant future.
So what will happen?
Well, what will happen is they will want, but they won't get just as easily as all that, because the government is very strong. It has very formidable police and military forces at its disposal, and it doesn't hesitate to use them. I believe in the long run it is going to be through economic action that blacks are really going to acquire the muscle with which to enforce the demands that they're going to make. In other words, when they have built up a really strong trade union organization and they can withdraw their labor and they can withdraw their consumer power, then I think they'll have stronger bargaining forces than they have at present, which consists of throwing stones and petrol bombs and arson and a lot of violence.
Soweto. The initials stand for the Southwest Township, a black residential area outside Johannesburg. We film under protection of the black Soweto police. Soweto was a squatters' camp, which has swollen into a home for a population of at least 1 million, perhaps 2 million blacks. We had intended to film scenes at a school donated by a Jewish family, but we found that the schools were on strike. The sign listing the donators had gone up in flames some time ago.
There have been very considerable changes over the last 7 years, which admittedly probably are valued more highly by the white people than by the black people, because they don't yet touch the mass of the black people. But if you had visited South Africa 10 years ago and you're visiting South Africa now, I think you would observe quite considerable changes. I mean, there's been a relaxation in the segregation practices of this country to a very great extent, so that you'll find public buildings and you will find theatres and now cinemas, hotels, restaurants are desegregated. But that, of course, only affects those members of the black people who can afford those things, which are largely luxury things. But at the same time, the government has relaxed its attitude, for instance, on black students in white universities. They don't really enforce a quota system, which still exists in law, and several public amenities are being desegregated, like beaches in some areas and so on. So there is a difference. And also in the labour field, the more important changes have taken place with the recognition of black trade unions and the repeal of the law that used to reserve all the skilled jobs for whites. The so-called job reservation law exists now on the mines only, and there I think it is about to go as well. But it's gone in industry, and the recognition that black people are permanently urbanized, and this means that they are allowed now to have freehold possession of their homes in the black townships. But the fundamentals remain unchanged. In other words, race classification still exists, obviously, in the statute books, and the whole question of separate state education in the schools, separate residential areas under the Group Areas Act, those things, of course, are still firmly in place in South Africa, and that is what we are pushing to have removed.
The King David Jewish School in Johannesburg. A group of secondary school pupils meet with youngsters from the black township of Alexandra.
Everyone wants to learn, and so that the education actually is improving, because all the black children now want to learn.
But they haven't got facilities like us.
Yeah.
They don't get the same as us. They don't get the same subsidy by the government.
Yeah.
I mean, the whites.
I mean, you get how much? They spend 200 rand on each pupil,
and you get about.
And the government spends 1,500 rand on each white pupil. And so they buy the government buys books for the white student and this, and you, because I see.
You're buying for yourself.
But now
you have to buy for yourself,
and your income's.
But Caroline tells me now that they bought you books and they say that you must burn them.
Those books, I think to me they are useless, because they are forcing us to buy quality books, but they are giving us a 32-page book. Then that book is like a scribbler to me.
So imagine if you're in standard 10 and
using that book
for everything.
Not for everything.
You have to buy your own books anyway.
That book won't last 2 months.
Yeah. What do they do if you don't burn your books? They'll hit you. Unfortunately, maybe they'll kill you because of your books. So you should do it. If
your black comrade will kill you.
Because if you don't burn the books, it means that you're for the government.
They kill you. What can you do to make South Africa a liberated country without the violence?
No, if only the government can change. As from now.
What happens if the government doesn't change?
People are still going to go on.
So there will be violence.
In fact,
yes, there will be violence.
The Jewish children have never been to Alexandra. The black youngsters have never been invited inside a white home.
We have to look at what comes after apartheid. And we have to try and see that after apartheid in South Africa, there is a society which has the values of the free world. Many of us, and I think that applies to all the Jews who are in Parliament, have been against apartheid all our lives. And we fought against apartheid. We continue to fight against apartheid. And we do not want a system after apartheid which is as bad as the one that we have fought against. A state which would find itself under Eastern Bloc influence, a society which would have ideologies in the economic field which are contrary to Western values, a society in which there isn't freedom of religion, a society in which I, as a Jew, for example, cannot openly worship, cannot openly participate in my communal interests, cannot openly be a Zionist, cannot openly show my affection for Israel. This is the kind of society that, as a Jew, I would not like to see in South Africa, and therefore have to see does not come about.
The whites first spread out into the South African hinterland from here, Cape Town. A stopover on the sea route from Europe to the Far East. Britannia ruled the waves and, conquering Cape Province, began setting limits on the activities of the early settlers who came from Holland, Germany and France, and are today known as Afrikaners. The Afrikaners set out on the great trek inland in order to set up independent states of their own. They called these new frontiersmen voortrekkers, pioneers. Their journey was fraught with difficulties and dangers, as this tribe of white settlers frequently clashed with the black native tribes, in particular with the Zulu. With a fervent belief in their aim, the Afrikaners pushed inland for many hundreds of miles. Being zealous Calvinist Christians, they took the Bible with them on their trek. They saw themselves as a chosen people, setting out for freedom with God's blessing in order to bring the light of the Bible to Africa's black tribesmen. Journey's end resulted in the setting up of independent states. But these were destined to survive for only a few score years. At the beginning of this century, the British went to war against the Afrikaner farmers, the Boers. The heavily armed British won the day, but the Afrikaners, though defeated in battle, survived to eventually become the rulers of the country. Today they form the majority of the white population. 60% Afrikaners, as against 40% of British extraction. These are the dominant element in most regions of the country. The struggle raging today in South Africa is mainly between the white Afrikaners and the black indigenous Africans. The Zulus are the largest of the black South African tribes, 6 million in number. The tribe is scattered over a vast territory, KwaZulu. Here in the little village of Ulundi lives their tribal chief. The menfolk insist on being filmed in traditional costume. The Zulu reject the idea of autonomy under a white government. They demand full political equality. Their leader, Chief Buthelezi, has abandoned the tactics of violence and is today considered to be a black moderate. We meet with Chief Buthelezi in KwaZulu's Parliament House.
We have to resolve problems here through negotiation and reconciliation, because here we don't have settlers. We have a white population which is indigenous now, whose country this is as well. You know, it's not like even Zimbabwe. We're just settlers here. We're a little over 200,000. Whereas here we have millions of white people who have no other home except here. So it's quite clear that because of our interdependence, somehow we have to survive together, because you see, whites need blacks as much as blacks need whites.
Vast regions of the African continent have been suffering from a prolonged drought. Zulu women have been forced to take part in government-initiated work projects in order to earn a minimal wage. A few months ago, they bid farewell to their chief, who was setting out on a mission to the Holy Land. Chief Buthelezi, who has strong connections with the Jewish community in Durban, had decided to visit Israel.
I've been traveling in Israel and I've been looking at Jewish history. And when I see how much the Jews have had to bear over the centuries, I mean, what my people have suffered is nothing compared to that, because after all, a little over 100 years, my people were a sovereign nation. So I think that there's a lot that one that can teach us, you know, in our struggle for human rights in this country and human dignity. And I would say that in Durban, my closest friend in the white community is Mr. Arnold Zulman, who is a Jew, who, when black people were not allowed, in fact, to stay in hotels, his house was virtually my home away from home, and I could come and go there freely. And he received, I think, some threatening voices at the dead of night. Where are you, Arnold Zulman? We, the whites, don't like it that you are a friend of Buthelezi, and so on.
Durban, a port city in the province of Natal on the shores of the Indian Ocean. Here we find a travelling exhibition from Israel's Diaspora Museum depicting the history of South African Jewry. The majority of South Africa's Jews were Lithuanian refugees from Europe. At first, they were small traders, travelling between the Afrikaner settlements, whose farming communities saw in them brothers in a faith which sprang from the Old Testament. In a letter written to folks back home in Lithuania, we find the following words. We settle here in peace and quiet, rejoicing in a glorious freedom. The Afrikaner Boers welcome us as brothers in Israel and see us as the chosen people.
This is a picture of the Lipinski family taken in Durban in the late 1800s on the Durban beach over here. It's a family reunion. I believe one of those are my great-grandfather.
The serpents of anti-Semitism will never lay their poisonous eggs in such a land. As their hatred for the British grows, their love for our people grows in equal measure. Many of us here have become wealthy and respected, our successes praised by all and sundry. An ostrich ranch at Oudtshoorn. The first Jewish traders in ostrich feathers arrived here 100 years ago, perceived that the land was good, and set up a ranch of their own. Once there were so many Jews here in Oudtshoorn that it became known as the Little Jerusalem of South Africa.
This feather down here, is this the one that's...
You like the lady's hat, Freddie? Yes, indeed you do. You like the lady's hat.
We are filming at the Lifshitz family's ostrich ranch.
It looks quite edible. These are the white wing plumes, the most important feathers on the body of the ostrich, and feathers which gets taken after approximately 6 months. But we cannot pluck it, because in the quill of the feather is a blood and a nerve line. And that is why after 6 months we cut the feather off, 3 centimeters above the blood and the nerve line. We leave the quill inside the body for 3 months to get ripe. Then the quill is plucked from the body and a brand new feather then regrows from the same spot on his body. Now, from behind his head, up there, up to more or less over here, he has 18 neck vertebrae. And that is why the neck of an ostrich is so immensely supple, so very movable. If by chance he should run at full speed, trip and fall and start rolling, or run into a fence or a low-hanging branch, his neck won't break. It will just curve together with his body. It's like a rubber snake. It's immensely movable. Don't try that with your ladies, gentlemen. Right. That's the way you get on, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's the handbrake. All right, show us your reverse gear. Into reverse, and there she goes. Left turn with the flicker lights. There you are, the left turn, and then right turn with the flicker lights. And there is right turn. Right, for the last time, reverse gear. There you go. Thank you very much. Well done.
All this nonsense which you hear about apartheid and that is all going. The government is changing fast. The thing is like this, the government cannot change overnight because these blacks are really not educated. They've got to be educated first. The government is spending millions on their education. And once they become educated in that, they can sort of take their place into these higher positions.
So who is causing all these problems?
Causing the problems is the communists. The communists are making all the trouble in the world. They are educating all the black people, the terrorists. They are training them to become terrorists, to do damage in this country. Because what they want to take this country. They want all the minerals, the richness that this country has got, they want. And they want to take the sea route from the west to the east to block off America completely. And I don't think America is going to allow this. Not at all. And I think that in the future, this country is going to become a very, very, very good country with no problem to anybody.
Most of the younger generation have left Little Otshorn for pastures new. Some to the big cities, some to different countries overseas. The local synagogue has been handed over as a gift to the Municipal Museum. The Jewish cemetery is watched over by Chaim Shapira.
In 1913 there was about 600 families here. I would say there were near 2,000 people. Today we've got 150, 30 families today.
And what's for the future?
The future is a very ticklish question. You know, the future of this country is very much in the balance. We don't know.
The neighborhood called Gardens in Cape Town. Here stands South Africa's first synagogue. The synagogue is Orthodox, according to the Misnaglin tradition brought to Africa by the Jews from Lithuania.
Li, Betabat,
Zu,
Kadat,
Moshe,
V'Yisrael.
Mekudeshet. You can let go. You can take back your flowers. The congregation may be seated.
Ironically enough, it is South Africa's policy of apartheid which has preserved the Jewish community. Minorities never intermingled. On the contrary, they were encouraged to preserve their individuality.
The Jews are a people of hope. They're not a people of despair. And this country requires hope. And if the Jews remain in the country, and if they remain in a country which has given them over 100 years of succor, when they were removed from the ghettos of Eastern Europe, and they owe at least some duty and obligation to South Africa to return to South Africa some of the aspects of living which South Africans given to the Jews, to give a lead as to the future of the country.
The Herzliya Secondary School in Cape Town. Within the Herzliya educational network, some 80% of Jewish children are taught from kindergarten up to matriculation. Hebrew is a compulsory language, and the South African Ministry of Education even permits Herzliya pupils to take their matric examinations in Hebrew.
לא יישא גוי אל גוי חרב, ולא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. אנחנו ראינו את הקטע הראשון של העולם האידיאלי של ישעיהו. מי לא מבין שם איזושהי מילה? המילה ונהרו, יפה. יש לנו את המילה ונהרו. מה עושה הנהר? הנהר זורם, will flow.
Onerous on the Atlantic coast. The Habonim Youth Movement summer camp. The youth leaders are preparing for an influx of thousands of children. The South African Jewish community defines itself as Zionist. Nevertheless, despite the revolution the country is experiencing, the number of emigrants to Israel is not significantly increasing.
That's what I was saying. I was saying that to collect money and to give it to Israel, you're not a Zionist. But to actually to go there and live there and to first of all to strive to go there and actually go there, then you are. And to sit in some federation, some collect money is not Zionism.
No, but Israel and the relationship between Israel and the Gola, I think is a concert, a symphony concert. Because you have the orchestra over there, the orchestra who are involved, who are creating something, who are directing it, who are directly involved, okay? Who have composed what is going on, okay? There's the... what do you call it? The
conductor.
Conductor. Okay, he's conducting. People that are fully involved. And then you've got the audience who've paid to come and have a look what's going on. And you've got the audience and they're prepared to pay the money and they're watching, but they're not involved.
We have people in South Africa whom I would rather call friends of Israel than true Zionists. These are people who are dedicated and devoted and collect money for the Magbit and for the women's organizations and play sport for Maccabi, and they are involved in Israel activities. But Aliyah is nowhere in their lifetime program. Whether that person is a Zionist or not is a question of definition. I believe that a Zionist is a person who has in his life program the intention and the idea of settling in Israel. I feel often a bit embarrassed at this type of question because I think I have a chutzpah to even attempt to answer it. I am still in South Africa. I am not on the El Al plane going to settle in Israel. So I can't really express opinions or criticize. I believe that when I and my family are on the El Al plane, then I will answer that question, perhaps with a little more honesty. But in my opinion, a Zionist is a person who is going to settle in Israel, no doubt about it.
If you haven't got a collar and a tie-key, you ain't got to heaven when you die-key, tie-key.
The community leaders are at a crossroads. In which direction should they steer? Stay in South Africa? Leave? Emigrate to Israel?
No Jewish leader can assume to himself the right to advise people what to do in relation to staying or going. It's a highly personal and family decision. Secondly, I personally believe that we have a role to play here. We have a role in the advancement of the society, in the Judaic message, in assisting the society in this transition process, and I certainly don't believe the crisis situation to which you referred is solved by walking away.
Lee Stock is a rancher born and bred. There used to be a lot of Jewish ranches scattered all over Cape Province, in the region of Malmesbury. Many have sold off their lands and departed for distant places. Lee Stock would also very much like to move to Israel, but his wife is more attracted to Texas. She is afraid of the security situation in Israel.
The farm is 880 morgen, which is about 750 hectares, and I think possibly in the region of about 64,000 dunam. Is that what it should be? Well, it's probably quite a big compared to Israeli standards. We have on the farm at the moment 200 head of cattle, Aberdeen Angus that we use for beef. We have 300 hectares that we put under wheat and 300 hectares that we put under oats. And we are pressing about 250 tons of grapes for winemaking.
Selling off a ranch is not a simple matter. Even Lee's non-Jewish neighbors have been offering their lands for sale. Buyers are not easy to come by in these uncertain times.
For reasons as we know, the political side is not very stable and one doesn't know what the future holds. But it's very, very heartbreaking.
Kom Oma.
Lee Stock has 10 colored workers of mixed race. He is concerned for their future were he to leave. What will their new boss be like? Will they be able to manage for themselves without him after having been dependent on him for so long?
Kom je weg met die 3 punten of met hydraulics?
Die 3 punten.
Okay.
Lee's colored workers live in homes he himself built for them. Lee took the trouble to make sure that their children were sent to school in Malmesbury. Lee Stock invited us to come with him to visit the local synagogue. The rabbinical seminary adjoining the synagogue is now a supermarket. The only hint of its former purpose is the window. The synagogue itself has been handed over to the municipality for preservation. The religious artifacts have been sent away to Cape Town's Herzliya School. When Lee himself celebrated his bar mitzvah here, there was not enough room for all of the guests. Today, Malmesbury has only 6 Jewish families and no need for a synagogue.
Many of us from the Zionist youth movements who had the opportunities in the early 50s when we were young, without the responsibility of children and families, should then have gone to Israel, no doubt, and established ourselves in Israel and had our families in Israel, then no doubt we would not have had the problems that we face today. Because the problems that we face above everything else is that we are divided from our children. And if our children will go to 3 or 4 different countries in the coming years, then we will be lonely old parents who are not having the opportunity to live with our grandchildren.
There is one Jewish group, however, which is not only not preparing to leave South Africa, but is, on the contrary, expanding and increasing its influence. These are the Chabad Hasid.
Shalom, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Jewish Sound, Africa's only Jewish radio program, brought to you by the Lubavitch Foundation. Your host, Rabbi Yossi Goldman, and it's my pleasure to present another 60 minutes of Jewish music, thought, drama, and discussion.
Nurse? Since when does this hospital allow patients to take their own blood pressure?
But Dr. Caldwell, Mr. Cohen isn't taking his pressure. Those are his tefillin he's winding around his arm.
Oh, I see. Tefillin. Of course, yes.
Try tefillin every day for your Jewish injection.
The Rebbe has given us his encouragement, his blessings, and in his vision, and he's a man of saintly vision, with a tremendous past record of having been correct in the past over many, many decades. And it is his very strong view that South Africa will continue to be a viable country and a peaceful country.
העיקר לא לפחד
גשר צר מאוד, אבל העיקר הוא לא לפחד.
In the very heart of Johannesburg stands the great synagogue. It is here we come to meet with South Africa's chief rabbi, Rabbi Bernard Casper. He came here 25 years ago on a mission from Israel, which has taken longer than was at first anticipated. Today, he too is leaving South Africa on his way back to Jerusalem.
אני חושב שהיהודים תמיד יהיו ויראו כחלק מהאוכלוסייה הלבנה, מה שיקרה להם, יקרה גם להם.
ואתה לא חושב שדברים טובים יקרו פה?
אני מפחד לומר דברים, תפתח פה לשטן. אבל אני חושב שאנחנו הולכים לקראת מצבים לא נוחים. אני חושב שהקהילה תצטמצם, הזקנים יישארו, הצעירים חושבים ברוב רובם לצאת מכאן.
future bring? You shine through me, but will you see me through? African sky blue.